Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the live stream. Happy Tuesday. Should we just jump into it? I think we should. How fun. Good morning, everyone. Let me just make sure I'm in the right spot. Yeah, let's get going. Hi. Hello. Welcome. Oh, I'm not centered. Welcome to the live stream, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Elizabeth Holmes, founder and CEO of the now infamous blood testing company Theranos. This trial started last week. She's on trial for 12 counts of fraud and conspiracy and has pleaded not guilty to all 12. If convicted, she could face up to 20 years in prison, and the central question basically is, did she intentionally mislead investors and patients? So let's talk about it. If you're new here, my name is Leija. I'm a real-life lawyer on a mission to demystify the law and how it affects your everyday life. That being said, I may be a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. Nothing that I say should be construed as legal advice, and you should always seek the advice of a licensed attorney before making any legal decisions. Thank you so much, Fork McSpoon, for your generous donation. As you can see, stickers and super chats are enabled. Any money spent goes towards literally keeping the lights on here and helping me to bring you this hard-hitting content. So thank you in advance for your generosity. Please know I'm going to just jump into the content, and so hold your questions till the end. Also, you'll note I'm wearing one of my pieces of merch. It's this Dump Him t-shirt, which you can buy at my merch store. It should be linked below. If it's not, you can just head on over after this to my YouTube profile, and there should be a little store button on top that you can click to check out my merch. We've got some fun stuff over there. So thank you in advance for your support. Let's jump into it. Well, first, let me actually take a step back. For those of you who haven't heard of this or don't remember the details, I've created a slideshow for you. All right. Elizabeth Holmes on trial. USA v. Holmes is the case. This is Elizabeth Holmes. She was this very ambitious young girl. Like, from a very young age, she told her family she wanted to create something big that would change the world. And she told her family that, and she had these aspirations. So she goes to Stanford because she wants to create something amazing. And she lasts about 2 semesters. And then she drops out. And however, that's just enough time to woo the right people into believing in her vision and her great idea that's going to change the world. She wants to develop a blood test that can be done with just a drop of blood. So instead of having to pull out all these vials of blood from people to test for illnesses, which you have to do for an array of illnesses, she wants to develop a test that would actually take just 1 drop of blood. And that's all it would take. So it seems a little innocuous or simple to someone maybe not in the medical field or who hasn't had an illness that required blood to be drawn regularly, but it can be life-changing for people. If you have to get your blood drawn regularly, or if you have, small veins, collapsed veins happens a lot in older people, it could lead to greater access to preventative care for people and could really kind of revolutionize the medical profession, at least when it comes to blood testing. So it's a great idea. Yeah, it's a great vision. The problem is we can all have great ideas. I have an idea. Wouldn't it be cool if we cured cancer? I feel like that would really be life-changing. I think that would change the world. So then I just go to investors and say, hey, I took 2 semesters of biology once and I have this grand vision. I'm going to cure cancer. That's basically what she did. She got one Stanford professor to believe in her, and with his influence and her absolute conviction that her dream would become a reality, she got hundreds of millions of dollars in financing to start Theranos to create her dream blood testing device with no more understanding or proof that she could actually make it happen than I have today in claiming that I would like to cure cancer. It is absolutely batty. All right, so this professor that believed in her from Stanford, his name was Channing Robertson. That's him. He's a chemical engineering professor at Stanford who was Theranos' first board member. He convinced reputable scientists to join the company, and once she got in the right people's ears, Elizabeth Holmes managed to get in the room with some very powerful people and convince them of her vision. 2 eventual members of the board of Theranos included Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, two former secretaries of state. I don't fully get it, but honestly, this case is just a ringing endorsement for how often I scream about prestige and how much bullshit it is. Like, one powerful guy's like, hey, listen to this chick. She wants to change the world. And then the rest just follow suit without stopping to think, hey, she's got like maybe 2 semesters of chemical engineering under her belt, and no one's ever been able to do this before. Maybe let's question things or wonder if this is worth putting millions of dollars into. And the board, they weren't made up of scientists. It was made up of like these secretaries of state, politicians, people with no scientific background, which is fine, but there was really no scientific oversight happening with this technology. And the scientists on the ground trying to develop the technology were allegedly sounding alarm bells early on regarding the fact that this just didn't work. The technology just wasn't there. My little girl Moira, my English bulldog, just ate breakfast and she has joined us. She's extra grumbly and grunty today, so if you're hearing some weird grunting in the background, it's my dog. So apparently, though, there was just something about Elizabeth Holmes. Kissinger described her as ethereal. James Mattis, Trump's Secretary of Defense, that James Mattis, he was an investor, and he described Elizabeth Holmes as someone with integrity and competence. And he said both technical and scientific, but also focused on human rights in the most classical sense of what human rights are about. I don't even know what that means, but again, this guy has no scientific background, and she took 2 semesters of chemical engineering. It is just shocking. Anyway, so she drops out of Stanford in 2003 at the age of 19, starts this company with the funding she gets by wooing the right people and her grand vision for the world. And for the first 10 years, it operates under the radar in stealth mode, trying to develop the technology. Again, it's not working. People know it's not working, but they're kind of in development mode, figuring it out at this point. During this time, a man named Sunny Balwani joins the company in 2009. He's this tech guy who's had success in past investments during the dot-com boom. He drives an ostentatious black Lamborghini and has absolutely no scientific background. A common theme here. He holds various roles in the company. He's on the board, he's its president, and he's the COO. At some point in there, he and Elizabeth start a romantic relationship, and they begin living together. This is relevant for a few reasons, which I will get to. Then in 2013, so they've been going at it for 10 years trying to figure out this technology, they start heavily publicizing in 2013 this product, this miracle that tests blood with a few drops and can diagnose hundreds of ailments. All the while, the technology wasn't there, and scientists on the ground trying to develop the tech were like, WTF, it's not there. And by 2015, Holmes is like this new Steve Jobs behemoth in the startup world in Silicon Valley. Everyone thinks she's this groundbreaking trailblazer, and she's on the cover of a bunch of magazines, Forbes, Fortune. They're flying high with funding and hype. She's got bodyguards. She's living this really luxurious lifestyle and going on TV and on the record with the media saying that this product works, that we can take a drop of blood and we can do tons of tests on it, hundreds of tests on it. And they get this giant deal with Walgreens, who's going to start carrying this machine, the Edison is what they called it, in every Walgreens store. So everyone in America will be within 5 minutes of a simple blood testing solution that will give them highly accurate results within hours, when it usually takes multiple vials of blood and days to get results back. And at its peak, this company is valued at $9 billion, making Elizabeth Holmes the youngest female self-made billionaire. All the while, it doesn't work. The tech simply doesn't work. And according to whistleblowers who were in there seeing the tech not working, Elizabeth and Sunny were told this time and again. Because generally when you're a scientist, you have a reputation you'd like to maintain, to keep your job and your credibility. So you don't often want to tie yourself to tech that simply doesn't work. So there were scientists working there who were coming forward to the heads of the company, Sunny and Elizabeth, to warn them. In fact, content warning, suicide, mute for like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear. One scientist who was convinced to join the company by Channing Robertson, that Stanford professor, he was there for 10 years and couldn't get the tech to work, knew it didn't work. He tried to tell Elizabeth, he was stonewalled and demoted, and he eventually ended his own life due allegedly to the extreme depression that he experienced while at the company because he knew that the technology didn't work. all right? And even though there was so much fanfare around this tech, the FDA had only approved the tests for one diagnosis, for herpes. Yet they were being used on actual patients for other things. And they were returning false positives that would be devastating for people. Like people who thought that their cancer was in remission took a blood test from Theranos and found out that their cancer was back. Or they were diagnosed as pre-diabetic because of a Theranos blood test. Like, these types of diagnoses lead to a regimen of drugs or invasive procedures. Like, people's health and lives were being toyed with because Holmes had this grand dream of changing the world and seemed to not care whether it actually worked or who she was hurting in the process. Anyway, so enough whistleblowers eventually start to come forward, including the grandson of George Shultz, that former Secretary of State on the board. And the Wall Street Journal publishes this extremely damning investigation into the allegations that the tech just doesn't work and that Theranos was actually doing the majority of its tests by taking full vials of blood and performing the tests on third-party machines. Like, they bought their competitors' blood testing machines and did the tests in the lab on those instead of this Edison machine that they claimed worked, that they were telling the public, the media, and investors that it worked. All right, so by 2016, the FDA was heavily investigating. Walgreens pulled out of the agreement. Sunny Balwani leaves the company, and things are crumbling. And then the private lawsuits start rolling in. First from investors who claim that they were defrauded because of the lies that they were told about the tech. Then by Walgreens, and all of those were later settled out of court for undisclosed sums. And then in 2018, Elizabeth and Sunny are charged by the SEC. That's the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a branch of the federal government that handles money fraud. They're charged with committing massive fraud over many years, and that they defrauded investors in the amount of $700 million. Because, you see, it is against the law to tell potential investors lies in order to induce them to give you their money. We don't like that here. So Elizabeth ended up settling with the SEC. As a note, this was not a criminal matter. This was the SEC doing its regulating job. It's not a criminal prosecution branch of the government. But in order to settle with the SEC, she agrees to step down and to not run a company again for the next decade, which is a pretty standard. If you've been found to be defrauding investors, the SEC is like, you know what, you can't be CEO anymore. You have to take a 10-year timeout. Sunny, however, plans on fighting the charges, and that's a case that's still ongoing. And then a couple months later, in 2018, Elizabeth and Sunny are indicted on federal criminal wire fraud charges. Again, this is 2018, and the case is just now going to trial in 2021. The trial started on August 31st, so a couple weeks ago, and it's scheduled to go through December. The trial was originally set to begin in July of 2020, but was pushed back due to the pandemic. So then it was scheduled for July of 2021. However, Elizabeth gets conveniently pregnant. Like, she's just fucking living her life in a nice apartment with her new boyfriend who's heir to some hospitality fortune, and then she gets pregnant and is conveniently due when? July 2021. Too inconvenient to start her trial on time. Anyway, so the trial finally started a couple weeks ago. There's talk that the defense is going to use her new motherhood as kind of trying to get the jury to like her and feel sympathy for her through all of this, because now she's a young mother on trial. It just adds to the drama. So, as for the accusations, she's charged with 10 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, both for defrauding investors and for defrauding patients. So let's quickly review what the prosecution has to prove in a wire fraud case. There are 4 essential elements of the crime of wire fraud. They have to prove that the defendant voluntarily and intentionally devised or participated in a scheme to defraud, that the defendant had the intent to defraud, that it was reasonably foreseeable that interstate wire communications would be used, and that interstate wire communications were, in fact, used. All right? So those are the elements that the prosecution has to show. This is a federal wire fraud case, so in order for it to fall under federal purview, it has to have crossed state lines, be part of interstate commerce of some sort, which is why that interstate wire communications aspect is there. That can be anything. That can be an email, that can be a phone call, that could be wiring transfer of money. So a lot of things fall under what's considered a wire communication, and every separate wire communication is a separate count of fraud. So every separate count that the government feels it can prove, they slap them with more counts, which is why there's 12 total counts, 10 for wire fraud, 2 for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So there you have it. There's the law. Jury selection started August 31st. 80 potential jurors were called into the San Jose courtroom, and of them, 7 men and 5 women were chosen, with 5 alternates in case any of the jurors can't serve on the jury for whatever reason. Jury selection took a few days. The potential jurors were asked to fill out a questionnaire, and then they were brought in and asked questions to determine whether they could be impartial regarding this case. Allegedly, all of these jurors had no idea who Elizabeth Holmes was or this case at all. And honestly, this jury selection process was a lot less intense than some jury selection can be. Like, for example, for the OJ trial, 250 potential jurors were called in, and it took a month and a half to pick the jury. I'd imagine that despite the publicity of this trial, there are people who haven't heard of it, and there's this less intense emotion. Like, we're dealing with wire fraud, not murder, you know? So people probably feel more able to be impartial and listen to all the facts. So opening arguments happened last week, and this is a really important time because this allows us to figure out more of what both sides plan on arguing, especially the defense. Because while there can't technically be any real surprises during trial, like each side has to turn over all their evidence to the other side and lists of all the witnesses, but when it comes to a criminal trial, the defense does have some air of mystery in that they don't have to list exactly who will for sure be called as witnesses. They just have to turn over a list of potential witnesses and all the evidence that they might use. And the evidence in this case, I heard, was like millions of documents. I've worked on cases before, and like having hundreds of thousands of documents for a trial is really normal. Like, and then if you're at the bottom of the pack, like I was when I worked in big law, you are the one who has to sift through those hundreds of thousands of documents to figure out which is the smoking gun that's going to prove your case. This case, millions of documents, and the witness list, my God, just take a look at it. This is the list of potential witnesses that the defense turned over as potential witnesses, and the prosecution. This is all the potential witnesses. Among the list, Rupert Murdoch, who was an investor. Obviously, they're not going to call all of these witnesses, but the trial is expected to span nearly 3 months, and it's for this very reason, because it takes a long time to question witnesses. There are other investors. I'm not actually sure if they're on this list, but some investors included the Walton family, like of Walmart, and Betsy DeVos. Yikes. Anyway, opening arguments is like the most exciting part of trial because you get to hear each side lay out its basic arguments for the jury. But this trial is not being televised or recorded, but if you live in San Jose, it is open to the public. You can go to the court and watch, and I highly recommend it. It's really fun to watch trials like this unfold. Even if they're just questioning a witness, which can get boring because it's like 5 hours of back and forth, it can be fun. So if you're in San Jose, go check it out. See the fanfare. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be like cameras outside constantly, and it's something to behold, the legal process in a trial like this, if you haven't. So the prosecution opened their opening arguments by saying basically what we already knew they were going to argue, that Elizabeth Holmes materially misrepresented the technology that Theranos was developing. She knew it didn't work, yet she told investors, the public, and patients that it did work, and she did so in order to obtain money from investors, and she told investors that the company was doing well financially when she knew that it was not. She did this knowingly, and she conspired with Sonny to do this as well. They also claim that Elizabeth ran fake tests on investors while telling them that it was the Theranos technology that was running the test, but knowing full well that it was not. They were using these third-party machines to test things. They claim that Elizabeth made claims to investors that they had a deal with the Department of Defense, when that was not the case. Like, she was claiming like the DOD is putting this machine on like helicopters and using it in the battlefields. And it was like just a blatant lie. It wasn't real. And she testified during her deposition testimony to the SEC that it was not true. The big thing that the prosecution has to prove is that Elizabeth Holmes knew that she was defrauding these people, that her statements were false. And it's hard to prove what's going on in someone's head, what someone knew. The prosecution has to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt because this is a criminal trial. For their opening arguments, the defense, they're really trying to paint Elizabeth as this victim, as someone who really didn't know what was going on, and as a sympathetic character who's just had this big dream. So they described Holmes as all in on Theranos' mission of making testing cheaper and more accessible. They say that she worked herself to the bone for 15 years. She poured her heart and soul into that effort. And in the end, here's a quote, "In the end, Theranos failed, and Miss Holmes walked away with nothing. But failure is not a crime. Trying your hardest and coming up short is not a crime." Okay, but this is all allegedly, but I'm clearly biased. She didn't just try really hard. She tried really hard and then failed and then concealed that and then openly lied to investors and patients that she hadn't failed. And that is a crime. Allegedly. All right? And the defense seems to be kind of grasping at all the straws that it can. It appears that they're going to argue that Holmes was a victim of Sonny and that he was psychologically, emotionally, and sexually manipulating and abusing her during the course of their relationship, and that's the reason why she did what she did. And that goes to the first element of fraud, which requires that the defendant voluntarily participated in the scheme to defraud. So if Sonny induced her to act, then it wasn't voluntary. It looks like the defense is going to call an expert up to discuss this manipulation and its effect on her actions and her brain, and it appears that Elizabeth herself may testify as to the control that Sonny exerted over her, which induced her to do the things she did. And look, I'm all about, believe women, but I don't know, man. She was, up on stage at conferences by herself saying that her machine could run hundreds of tests with a drop of blood, and she did it over and over and over again for years. Personally, as a survivor of emotional abuse, I'm not sure I'm really jive with that being used as an excuse to commit fraud. You know what I mean? I don't know. But look, she charmed a lot of investors. She did, and you gotta give it to her. I saw someone comment that. You gotta give it to her. She charmed a lot of people. She made a lot of people believe her, and that's not nothing. That's a skill that can't be learned. And she might make a great witness for herself, and it might be enough. She might be able to woo the jurors as well. Again, it's a criminal trial, so she has to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense does not have to prove she's innocent. The defense just has to poke enough holes in the prosecution's argument to get an ounce of doubt as to her guilt in the minds of jurors in order to supposedly get her to walk free, or at least have a lesser sentence. I think they're going to have a harder time proving the conspiracy elements of this case. At least that's what I find the most doubtful here. Yes, maybe both her and Sonny lied about the tech and the induced investors to give them money, but to also prove that they did so as a concerted effort on purpose together, I feel might be harder. So we'll see how the trial unfolds, but it's going to be weeks of witness questioning, so buckle up. Last week, the prosecution called their first witness, and she's the most senior person in charge of financials at Theranos, and she testified that Elizabeth knew that the financials of the company were not doing well because she, the witness, told Elizabeth as much. And she also revealed that the company was never audited after 2009. So, it was running until 2018, so it's almost a decade of never being audited. And that's a practice that most private companies do every single year because most investors look at audits before deciding to invest. So that was a pretty wild revelation, that they just weren't audited, and yet they were able to get all of that funding despite that. Again, the prestige. One prestigious guy's listen to this gal, give her your millions, and everyone follows suit. It's all made up. It's fake. Anyway, so that financial senior person at Theranos, her testimony continues today, is continuing right this moment. And time will tell. I'll stay abreast of this issue. I'll keep you up to date over on Twitter. There's a great podcast by ABC News called The Dropout. It goes really into detail of the whole background of Elizabeth Holmes' story, but they're also in the courtroom right now, and they're reporting. They're making podcast episodes as this trial unfolds. So if you want the gritty details, listen to that. But I will also be listening, and I'll keep you up to date over on my Twitter handle at Legia Miller. Check me out there. So time will tell. Time will tell what happens with Elizabeth Holmes, but I'm fascinated. Honestly, I'm most fascinated to hear about her testimony because I want to know how charming she is on the stand and how sympathetic she might be to jurors. So we'll see. So that's the story. That's it. I'll take your questions now. Reminder that super chats and super stickers are enabled. All the money spent goes to keeping the lights on and helping me bring this information to you. In the meantime, while you gather your thoughts and your questions, I want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. If you want to join me over on Patreon, we have chats. I fill you in on the background of my life, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about. I send pictures. We do private live streams. I have a Discord channel. If you want to get more involved in what's going on over here, consider supporting me on Patreon. I owe some people shout outs. Thank you so much to Noam Pilisher, Kelly Moore, Nicole Catherine, Junior Smith, and Mark Vargas. And thank you, as always, to my multi-platinum patrons, Brett, Piontech, and Anonymous. You know who you are. Thank you so much for your support. And now let's get into some questions. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? How do you feel about this? Do you think that Elizabeth Holmes is going to be convincing on the stand? Do you think that there's enough doubt that they'll be able to put in the minds of people or of the jurors that she'll be able to get off kind of scot-free? What do you think? Hello. Welcome. Thank you for your chats. Oh, she is toast. That's good. She might be. I mean, right? It seems pretty damning, right? That she just straight lied about things when there's so much testimony that it didn't work. And I'm sure they're going to show a timeline of here's when this scientist came forward and told her behind the scenes it wasn't working. And here's that same day or a month later when she went on stage and said, yes, this is working. And that'll be pretty damning and pretty convincing, I'd imagine. Let's see. Any other questions? Oh, interesting. So one person asked, do you think she's a psychopath? I did see an article when I was Googling this, and the article didn't convince me, because the article was citing some literature that was more than just a low voice, saying that schizophrenia is a low voice is a symptom of schizophrenia, but it's a low voice that's also kind of slow and maybe stuttered, things like that I was I think that might be taking it a little too far. Sociopath? Maybe. I'm not a doctor and I'm not diagnosing her with this. I don't know, but she doesn't seem to have any sort of conscience about what she's done. So maybe. The low voice is a really fascinating thing, because people have said that it's fake, that she was faking it. People have heard her use her regular voice, which is not as low. But then I think she's also said, I use that so that I can, assert myself in rooms. And, we have to acknowledge that this is a young woman who is trying to make it in the scientific community. So there is a level of, empathy I can have there. She was in rooms with old white men who, ran the world. And she managed to woo them, and she managed to assert that she knew what she was talking about, and maybe she did so by this really low voice, by I've noticed that she sits kind of masculinely, takes up more space. This might be learned behavior that was a survival instinct for her to exist in this world that is very male dominated. And I can empathize with that. I can. As much as it's kind of weird. I get it. But it is interesting. We'll see what her voice sounds like. I'm sure they're not recording it or anything, but I'm sure that they will report on whether or not that deep voice is present in the courtroom. Okay, let's see. Let's see what other questions you have. Let's see. Well, so how might a jury for an SEC case differ from another criminal jury? So the SEC case was not criminal. The SEC is just a regulatory branch of the government. So they investigate fraud charges, and then they kind of like shut companies down that are committing fraud, and the people, they kind of like punish them accordingly, but they can't impose like criminal punishment. I'm not even sure that there is a jury trial when it comes to the SEC. I think it's an administrative trial that just like the judge just considers the evidence and the facts and makes a determination. I think that's how it works. I'm not an expert in the SEC, but I believe that's how it works. So this is the first time she's going before like a jury of her peers on this. So let's see. So this is an interesting question. I mean, maybe they could have. Why are there no charges for endangering patients? What if they delayed knowing about diseases because they were tested by Theranos? I think I might not be right, but because this is a federal case and they wanted to get her on federal charges, and because it crossed state lines with the wire fraud aspect of it, the feds are prosecuting the wire fraud piece. I feel like if she hurt or endangered patients, that would have to be at like a state prosecution level, which could very well also happen because it's separate from a wire fraud charge. That could also happen. But I imagine the feds wanted to step in because of how national this was, and states are really bad at like coordinating their prosecutions. So it could just be that the states were like, great, you take her as long as she's behind bars, you know? That could be. But yeah, I don't know. It might be that they don't have enough evidence against her for like the actual endangerment of specific patients to actually bring a claim. Let's see. Thanks so much for all your comments. I have to scroll through them. Oh, do you think this will harm the women's movement in the workplace? No, I don't. I think it's pretty easy to differentiate Elizabeth Holmes as an isolated incident from all women generally. Do I love that she's claiming that she's being abused when it seems like the evidence doesn't stack up? No. No, I don't, because I don't like false accusations, because it makes the people who come forward with true accusations, which is most of them, but the 0.9, 0.1% of women who or people who do come forward with false accusations kind of make everyone else look bad, because that's how society works. So I don't love that. Is it going to harm the women's movement in the workplace? No. I think what's going to harm the women's movement in the workplace is all the white men in Congress who don't give a shit. Let's see. So, how can they use the Sonny controlling her defense for the years 2005 to 2009? Prior to him joining the company, she was lying about the device working back then. I think the issue is that from about 2003 to 2013, they were in stealth mode. They were still developing the technology. So I don't know how much they were claiming then that it was working. I mean, I guess by 2013, Walgreens was in. So they had already been discussing it with Walgreens. So I don't know, but I don't know if from 2005 to 2009 they have much evidence there. But I'm not sure, because again, there's 6 million pages of evidence and I haven't seen it all. Let's see. Let's see. Do we know why they lied in the first place yet? I think because they got in so deep. I think she made this promise and this dream to the initial investors, and then she started realizing that it wasn't working, and then she started running out of money, and then she's needed to lie to make it work. I mean, that's how frauds work. I worked very briefly as an intern at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston in the Securities and Financial Fraud Division, so I helped put together cases to prosecute people committing these types of fraud. And this is how frauds work. It's like people think that they get too close to the sun. They think they can get away with things because they they do for a little bit, and then it all starts just snowballing on top of itself, and then it gets out of control, but they're so deep in the lie that they have to just keep going with it. And honestly, I find these crimes so fascinating because the psychology is so wild to me, because like they really think that they can get away with things a lot of the time, or they're just in so deep that they like cannot take a step back and be like, whoa, like this is so messed up, I need to stop. Like it's a wild crime, fraud, and the people who commit it are an interesting bunch of people. How is Moira doing this morning? As you can hear, she is snoring. She's sleeping. She had her breakfast. She's doing great. She had a little tummy upset last week that she is fully recovered from, and she would like to eat anything and everything again. So that's good. But she's doing great. She's 7 months old now, and I can feel her exiting the puppy stage a little bit in a way that is really delightful. Like she can entertain herself. I'm not constantly worried that she's gonna just throw herself off a ledge and hurt herself. She's growing up. She's doing great. All right, back to the case. How do you think the trial is going to turn out? People are saying it could go both ways. Like experts are saying it's unclear, again, because we haven't seen her testimony. We don't know how sympathetic she's going to be able to paint herself. But I really think that the evidence is pretty damning. I think that it doesn't look good, and I think that the prosecution, I've heard they did great at opening arguments, and so they might have the evidence to tell the story. It's all about telling a story at this point. Once it gets to trial, it's all about those 12 jurors and connecting with them and getting them to believe your side of the story. What could be the worst penalty for what she has been charged for? She can get up to 20 years in prison for this. That's the maximum penalty that she could get. So we'll see. And that's another thing that people are kind of shocked about with this pregnancy. Like she gave birth a month and a half ago, right before a trial that could put her behind bars until that kid is 20 years old, which is pretty shocking. So it's unclear whether this was like a sympathy move. I mean, obviously, it could just be that she wanted a kid, and that's fine, whatever. But like, who knows? I don't know what she was thinking with that, but could be 20 minutes. Oh, or 20 years, sorry, 20 minutes. This is interesting. My professor was involved with this and left right before shit hit the fan. There were Stanford professors who she asked to get involved who were like, I don't know if your professor was a Stanford professor, but there were Stanford professors who were like, this chick doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not investing at all. This is insane. This doesn't make any sense. How much time do you think she's gonna get? I don't know. I just can't imagine that she is going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I don't see her getting 20 years. I see her being found guilty of at least some of the counts, because each count is a separate like transaction, like a separate wire fraud, plus the conspiracy. And I really think the conspiracy is gonna be harder to prove, because not only do they then have to prove that she intended to defraud people, but that also she conspired with Sunny Balwani to do so, which I think is an additional thing that, unless they have a smoking gun text that's like, Sunny, I know that this isn't working, but we need to tell investors that it is because we need money. I doubt that they have that kind of smoking gun testimony, so I don't know that she's going to get all of the counts. And I think that there's going to be enough mitigating factors, maybe, as to like good behavior or her child, or I don't know, lack of a past record of any sort of crimes that will work in her favor. And I just don't see it being 20 years. So no. Will any of the other investors be affected legally for investing in the company if she's found innocent? I don't think so. I think because they're claiming that she defrauded them, they didn't know any better, so they didn't commit any crimes. They genuinely believed in her. And once you become like head of a company like this and you have investors, you owe them a fiduciary duty to act in their own interests or in their best interests. So, it's not necessarily going to affect them at all. Is it federal prison, and are they worse? Yes, she would be going to federal prison. No, they're not worse. I don't actually know. I've been inside one federal prison. Yeah, just one federal prison. It was a woman's prison. And like they had a lot of, I mean, I was given the tour by the people who like run the prison, so bias was definitely there, but like they had a lot of access to resources. They had a really cool canine program where they gave the inmates rescued dogs, and they cared for them just to like give them something to work on and whatever. And they had you could get your like esthetician certificate while in there, by like doing other inmates' hair, and people would come in from the outside to kind of help them get their certification and teach them and train them. So they had, and the facilities were fine, like not the horror stories that you hear. And there aren't many women's federal prisons, like all women's federal prisons. There's one in southern Minnesota, which is the one that I went and toured. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the prison. The private prisons, obviously, there's a lot less oversight than when it's like federally run. But at least, so I worked for a judge for a little bit, and the judge was always, and this was in the federal court, so these people were going to federal prison, and the judge was always like, I hope that you learn from this experience. I hope that you take advantage of the resources that are given to you while you're in prison to make your life better and to try to be a more productive citizen and to like find some direction in your life. And I hope that you are able to grow from this experience and move on, because this isn't your entire life. There will be life after prison, but like maybe use this as an opportunity to better yourself. This is, yeah. If they have millions of documents, I wonder how much of that is incriminating. Not much. I can tell you from experience. When documents of that magnitude are turned over, it's a lot of boring shit that some sad, lowly person, intern, or person at the lowest rung of the legal ladder has to sift through. So it's going to be a lot of emails that have nothing to do with what's going on, but just got kind of swept up. Basically, how they do that is they search your email server for like keywords that are requested from the other side. So like every email that says like that's between Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani probably was turned over. A lot of that is going to be like about business operations, boring shit, things that don't matter. Like most of it is not going to be incriminating. The job, once you get all that documentation, is to find the smoking gun, which often there isn't one. So you have to kind of piece together like, okay, this sets up the timeline. This email indicates that there might be something going on. When was this email sent in relation to when she made this claim? Like it's a real puzzle that you have to put together, which can be really fun as an attorney. It's exciting, but it can get really boring, especially with that. I mean, I've never worked on a case with that many documents, but when there's a lot, when there's tens, hundreds of thousands of documents involved, it's a lot of garbage. So, if she's convicted and the day after she's released, she starts a new company. I've heard that she's allegedly like been out in Silicon Valley trying to start a new company, which doesn't make any sense because the SEC barred her from doing so. So if she gets out past the 10-year bar that the SEC has placed on her, theoretically, I think she could start a business. I mean, she will be a federal like convict, so there's definitely layers there, but she could theoretically start a business. Like for example, Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, he's doing great. He's fine. He's out. He's living his life. He's still very rich, and people like look to him for business advice now. So like these people, they can't be stopped. And yeah, I feel like, I mean, I'm not saying that she's gonna go out and commit fraud again, but like a lot of people who commit fraud once, it's kind of becomes a trend, shall we say. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up because it's been 45 minutes and I appreciate your time. Thank you so, so much for all of your participation. I hope that this was interesting. I will keep you up to date as to what's going on with the trial over on my Twitter. So feel free to follow me at Legia Miller. You can also follow me on Instagram if you want more behind the scenes footage of my life. And thanks so much for all your participation and your super likes, chats, stickers, whatever they're called. And yeah, I'll see you later. Thanks, everyone. Bye.